training on media manipulation workshop. Jane, despite the fact that she couldn't find the room, is a great investigative reporter. So I expect her to kind of walk in while I was talking shit. My name's Joan Donovan. I presently work at the Harvard Kennedy School. I am very happy to be here selling our wares. So we put together a website called mediamanipulation.org a few years ago to try to create almost an encyclopedia or a dictionary of the tactics used by media manipulators and disinformers to disrupt institutions, to disrupt the flow of information, to socially engineer source materials so that journalists and other highly networked or densely networked individuals took up their bullshit. And so we decided that it would be great to catalog a lot of these tactics and give new vocabulary to the work that many journalists were already doing to detect, document, and debunk disinformation. And I think that what's important about this moment is the scale and the scope. Welcome, Jane, everyone. Jane made it. She's the real star. Hi. So we're going to go through this pretty rapid fire. If you don't understand anything, you need a point of clarification, just raise your hand and we'll bop back and forth. But in the interest of time, after this, I'll be available for questions. Jane will be available for questions. And we can even help you if you have a particular case or story that you're trying to think about new methods for investigating. Jane is expressly good at finding the trauma online. But not the right room. Yes, but not the right room. We already made fun of you for that. So it was very funny. So all the slides are available on this bit.ly link, and so I will post that to my Twitter, as will Jane, quickly after this, so you can just kind of sink in and enjoy some of the stories and the methods that we're about to talk about. And we decided to do a couple of different methods that Jane will dig into, but I'm going to talk primarily about mediamanipulation.org in a case study known as the Jan reports, which was the origin of the biolabs leak of the coronavirus. But the casebook is something that is open access. It's for anyone. It's styled as an open source textbook, so you can click through and read different case studies and look at different manipulation tactics. We have a couple of featured case studies, including how hijacked or astroturfed accounts and dark public relations faked support for China's COVID response. We have one about imposters pretending to be black activists about Operation Blacksit. We have one about copycat websites, including the Endless Mayfly Network, which interestingly faked a website from Harvard as one of its attempts to trick journalists into thinking that the information they were spreading was verified. And so we are really at the forefront with our case studies at looking at things that might be novel in some respects, that haven't developed a pattern yet. But once some troll or hacker or politician has figured out something that works, generally we'll see that tactic work over and over and over again. So we try to catalog them here under different labels. Cloak science is what I'm going to be talking about today, where a preprint archive was used to trick journalists into thinking that there was particular information available about the origins of COVID that was engineered by Steve Bannon. Misinfographics, there was a panel the other day where someone was talking about how fake statistics were designed and made to look really good as a graphic and shared as an infographic online, but it was part of an influence campaign. And as well as memes, I have a book out called Meme Wars about the online battles that disrupted democracy in America, and it goes from Occupy to the insurrection. looking at mimetic warfare. And so memes are something that often are taken as jokes or as irony, but they have become quite an important political tool, and often are used by politicians in very disruptive ways. So we also have a bunch of featured reports, particularly stuff that Jane has contributed to around tracking social media takedowns during the 2022 Russian invasion. Another fact sheet about Ukraine and Russia relations up until that point. Another one on the war in Ukraine and TikTok in particular, which I think was really prescient at understanding how TikTok was going to become a source of disinformation, especially as the short clips could be easily edited and recontextualized. So we saw often footage from different skirmishes and wars from years past being passed off as, in the case of this, disinformation, where it made it look like Ukraine was committing war crimes against Russia when the information was entirely manufactured. So one of the things that I think it's really important to understand is how people get misinformation, and a lot of it has to do with search. When you're looking for something, you're more vulnerable to misinformation because you know what you don't know. What is ivermectin? What is COVID? And often in algorithms, you will see a pre-populated list of search returns, and in this case, looking for ivermectin, for sale, for humans, dosage, tablets, tractor supply. What is about, right? For dogs, for COVID studies, right? And so that moment in search, someone might say, tractor supply, what's that? For sale, what's that? And what we were noticing is that people that were searching for cures for COVID were getting caught up in medical misinformation that was also political disinformation, in the sense that people were experiencing risk and they wanted to lessen their own personal risk, and so they were open to taking drugs or supplements or changing their lifestyle in order to mitigate that risk of COVID. Ivermectin became one of the canonical drugs, even internationally, as mostly right-wing politicians picked it up as if it would mitigate your risk. And as important, one of the major things that we see happen in political disinformation is that politicians, of course, are lying to the public. And the use of cloaked science or things that sound scientific or seem even scientifically plausible bet on individuals' uncertainty. And so when we're uncertain, we might be willing to take personal action that we otherwise wouldn't have taken. And political disinformation was really taking advantage of that, especially in countries with right-wing leaders who saw the threat of COVID-19 as very disruptive to the economy, not just disruptive to individuals in their health. So the way that we study this is a bit like a recipe. We look at 5 points of action in every case study. That is, where is the manipulation campaign being planned? Who's seeding the campaign across social platforms and the web? The most important part, though, is who's responding to it. Every day, someone is wrong on the internet. So if we focused on stage 1 and 2, we'd always find something to write about, because someone is always trying to launch a hoax. They're always trying to get the attention of celebrities, politicians, journalists. So what we need to really understand is, well, when does something get taken up? The most crucial question you must ask yourself as a reporter is, when is disinformation? Not just what is disinformation. And then we looked at mitigation factors and then adjustments by the manipulators to the new information environment. So I'll go through a case study and really show you what that looks like in practice. The origins of the COVID bioweapon rumor began on G News, which is funded by Guo Wengyi, an exiled Chinese billionaire recently arrested. G News is an online media outlet that publishes anti-CCP propaganda, and Guo partnered with Steve Bannon, formerly at Breitbart, strategist, to bring this message to Americans. And so this is where it all begins on this, ostensibly a WordPress website. Breaking news, China will admit coronavirus coming from its P4 lab. And this circulated quite a bit online. And of course, February 3, 2020, we were all upset and looking for answers. And this is right before the large shutdown of the world. So the origins become quite interesting as Bannon finds someone he believes is a whistleblower, Lytvynenko, who was at a Hong Kong lab studying coronaviruses. I've actually met one of her colleagues, and she was a fairly good scientist, but her colleague described to me that she had gone crazy. And that's what she said. She's also from Hong Kong, and so crazy might be a translational issue, but I believed her. And basically what Bannon was able to do is fly this quote-unquote whistleblower over to the U.S., and she did the round on right-wing media in the U.S., basically saying that her supervisors were covering up her own life-saving discovery about COVID-19, claiming that she knows that it was made in a lab. And as you can imagine, left, right, and center, this would be a bombshell if it were true, right? So how do we know it's not true? You've probably gotten that line from Facebook at some point that who can know what a truth is? Nobody is an arbiter of truth. Every information is the same. No? Not true. So how did it get seeded across the media is that we understood that there's a tight network of right-wing accounts, and they all had adopted her as a whistleblower. Chinese virologists claim she has proof COVID-19 was made in a Wuhan lab. You heard it here first at the New York Post. And so this is really important because we're getting a lot of interaction with this, but only on one side of the political spectrum. On the other side of the political spectrum, people were much more cognizant of the possibility that this might be untrue. And so what they did was pretty spectacular. So Lytvynenko and several co-authors published a paper on open-air Zenodo website. So this is an academic preprint archive. And usually academic preprint archives get about, I don't know, Fabio, is it 8 people might read your paper, right? Here we have over 1 million views. So, and the paper title is rather difficult to understand. Unusual features of the COVID genome suggesting sophisticated laboratory modification rather than natural evolution and delineation of its probable synthetic route. So it sounds like science, yes? Science-y. So you might read the headline and think, oh, there's something here. And people did. They started downloading it, circulating it on Twitter. But then when you dug into, well, who is Lytvynenko? Who are these co-authors? Several of the co-authors didn't exist, right? And who she was apparent through who she was being trafficked as on right-wing media. So we looked at these downloads, and the pattern is pretty clear. Most of the downloads happen right about here, and then it slowly ticks up over the next month. But for the most part, it was 9/14/20 is when she started the campaign, and that's when most of the links and views were happening. And then slowly over time, they started to roll out this document as proof. And of course, because it was on a preprint archive, if you don't know that a preprint archive has not been peer reviewed, it seems like science. It's like putting art up in a place that's not an art gallery in a way. You're like, okay, is that art if it's at the pizza parlor, right? But you go to a gallery, you know it's art. So going to the preprint archive is like going to the pizza parlor and thinking it's art. You see what I'm saying? It's not the same, but similar. Reactions became in pretty quick from right-wing media. It started to what we call trade up the chain to more influential news stations, including Tucker Carlson, Peter Navarro, who was an advisor to Trump at the time, was sharing the article and saying that, you know, she's been muzzled by the CCP and flees for her life to the US, speaks her own truth, and then is muzzled by the free American social media. Where's the outrage? And this is quite a common tactic of trying to point out that nobody's talking about something when literally 1 million people are looking at the stuff. Nobody's hearing about this, but 1 million people. So mitigation happened in really different ways. Instead of the media debunking her, you had Johns Hopkins University write an entire report saying that this is bogus and that some of the charts and graphs and are actually stolen from other scientific reports. And so it's not just that it's in the boundary of debatable science, but it was designed to hoax journalists. And as well, Facebook did some mitigation on it by putting an interstitial on Tucker's links, saying that this information was checked in another post by independent fact checkers. And Tucker Carlson took issue with this, saying that this kind of suppression of facts is exactly what the government would do in an authoritarian regime. And so any attempt to get people to understand what was happening here was really difficult. So what happened in terms of adaptation? Well, we partnered with the Washington Post and Craig Timberg, who's an excellent reporter if you've caught any of his panels here. And he actually went and interviewed Lytvynenko, and she had no idea who Steve Bannon was, other than he was a man that wanted to help her. And he wanted to get the word out, so he flew her to the United States, and he put her up in nice hotels, and he connected her to the US media. So in some respects, she was an unwitting participant in this campaign. And so they published a second paper up on Zenodo that I'll get to in a second, because Zenodo decided to put this label on. And at first Zenodo had said, as a preprint archive, we don't adjudicate what science is and what it's not. And so we wrote up a little brief and said, well, you better start, because journalists are looking at these preprint archives thinking that they are real science. And you are playing party to the hoax by refusing to label things that you know are scientifically debunked or controversial. So they did put up this tag saying potentially misleading contents, and then linked to more papers that had been peer reviewed and were published about the origins. So stage 5 also includes an adaptation by the manipulator, which is Lee, as well as paid for by the Rule of Law Society, which is a group owned by Bannon and Guo Wangui. They put up another paper saying SARS-CoV-2 is an unrestricted bioweapon, a truth revealed through uncovering a large-scale organized scientific fraud. Much more straightforward, right? But that one only got 381,000 reviews. And then, because not so many people were viewing it and they weren't picking up the garbage or the cloaked science left behind by Jan, they published another one saying the Wuhan laboratory origins of SARS and the validity of the Yarn reports are further proved by the failure of 2 uninvited peer reviews. And so they were trying to use this website to host this disinformation in the hopes that people would think they were looking at art when they were really in the pizza parlor. So what ended up happening? Lastly, I'll say that the debunking article written by Craig Timberg was the thing that really motivated Zenodo to take action. Even in academia, we can ask, but it's usually when press get involved and do the debunk that things change. And later what we saw is that because people had started to believe this idea that COVID was a bioweapon, not just a lab leak, because a lab leak can be an accident, right? Maybe we should say you can't do research on these kinds of things because they're, dangerous to society. But also, there's a very vast difference between something mistaken happened and something was being developed as a bioweapon. So there is that leap in logic that's really important here that leads to violence. So New Yorkers still live in fear of attacks. Megan Hirano, our U.S. Congress members, to introduce legislation to combat the surge of anti-Asian hate crimes. Hate crimes against Asians jumped 107% in California in an epidemic of hate. And so it's really important that we understand that there is a bright line between information and incitement to violence. And so we always have to conclude our stories by showing the real world impacts. It's not just that fake information was being circulated, because we know people lie on the internet. People lie all the time. It's like fact of life. But when that is provoking others to harm people or to commit hate crimes, that's when it becomes really newsworthy. And as journalists, your job is to make those correlations for the public. So Jane is going to talk about making those correlations and getting the data.
Yeah, thanks, Joan. I think this life cycle model is incredibly important because a lot of the time we as reporters don't know where to start with reporting on media manipulation and disinformation. And for me, when I first saw Joan develop the life cycle model, it has been an incredibly helpful framework. Although it's an academic research framework, it's also an incredibly helpful framework for journalistic research. And I don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to focus on one particular aspect of investigating online manipulation and disinformation, and that's monitoring. A lot of the tools and techniques that I show you will probably be pretty familiar with people in this room. Some of them will not be. What I will say is the Global Investigative Journalism Network, GIJN, is publishing a handbook on investigating basically all kinds of online investigations. I was very happy to contribute a chapter, so there will be more in-depth information there. And also my former colleague and I, Craig Silverman and I, are going to be teaching a Knight Foundation course that really digs in deep in online investigations tools. So if what you see now is interesting to you, but is tools that you've used a lot, just know that there's a lot of resources out there on how to do this work and how to really get your hands dirty with it. But the reason why I wanted to focus on monitoring is because in order to understand the impact that misinformation or disinformation will have ahead of time, it's really helpful to understand the communities that it targets. Very similarly to on-the-ground reporting, you can't just parachute into a community and understand why a single piece of information is impactful to the community. You need to have a handle on the information environment overall. That means developing techniques across the web. Monitoring social media platforms is a must. But also, as Joan said, search engines are incredibly important and frequently overseen source of false information. This is particularly true in countries where English is not the first language. We know that Google is much better moderated in English than it is in non-English languages. Blog and publishing platforms, like what Joan already talked to you through. I want to make a point of making sure that in your research you also think about streaming platforms, audio platforms, and video platforms. Those are frequently, podcasts as well, those are frequently the hardest to research for reporters because they're quite time intensive. But also, Joe Rogan's podcast has a much bigger audience than one Twitter account. And so it's incredibly important for us to take into account the impact that media, more long-form media, has. Messenger platforms, Discord, Telegram, Slack, Rocket Chat, even Steam, as we saw with the leaks coming out of the leaks around Ukraine. All of these are incredibly important spaces to know how to navigate ahead of time, because I'm sure many of you understand that you do not want to be learning how a new platform functions as news breaks. That is time you do not have. And alt tech as well. So this is things like 4chan, Things like highly specialized social media networks that may not have an incredibly wide audience, but do have a high level of coordination happening on them and are very frequently the origins of many of these campaigns. And what I want to say is that very frequently as reporters, we focus on social media platforms that we know and understand. We focus on Twitter because it's very easy to get information out of Twitter, even now. We focus on Facebook because we've covered Facebook for a really long time and we understand how the social network functions. But users of social media networks are not loyal to one or the other. And so we need to look at the way information travels across different platforms and across different social media networks. Otherwise, we will be missing the bigger picture of how these campaigns work. So I have about 10 minutes to talk you guys through a lot of information. One of the things that I wanted to show you is advanced Twitter search. If you've never used it before, it is a really great way to either narrow or expand the search on Twitter to monitor breaking news events or particularly important communities. This search operates through Twitter operators. I'll show you what this looks like in a minute, but what it really does is it allows you to zero in on a specific topic that you might be interested in. And really understand either what's happening in real time or what's been happening historically. I won't go through what each of these mean. I think generally they're all pretty self-explanatory, but I want to show you in practice why these are particularly useful and why Twitter, despite its continual destruction, continues to be an important place for reporters to begin monitoring online environments. So I'm Ukrainian, so the vast majority of my work right now is focused on the full-scale invasion. And when I do search terms, one of the things that I ask is obviously all the main questions of what have we already seen, what are the terms that we know about. But also it's really important to put yourself in the person who is posting the information. So when something happens on the ground, I am not saying Jane witnessed X event. I'm saying I witnessed X event. And so when you construct your searches, think through terms that might be useful to you, that people who write the tweets might be using, not only hashtags, because if you search only for hashtags, you're limiting yourself too much. And here's what this looks like in practice. First and foremost, I have 4 different terms for Kiev. One is a transliteration of Kiev from the Ukrainian language, which is the preferred spelling KYIV. One is transliteration from Russian. And as well, I'm including the terms for Kiev both in Russian and in Ukrainian. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you read other languages for this entire presentation, but I wanted to give an example of if you're searching a locale, do not limit yourself to English. And I know that actually right at the same time there's a ChatGPT session going on, and there's a lot of questions about the impact ChatGPT will have on the information environment. But I will say one thing you can do is you can get it to translate searches like this for you really easily if you want to work across languages in monitoring environments. So right away, we're getting some results, but it's going to be pretty general. There's a lot of people talking about Kiev. But I did want to make sure to bring your attention to the People tab over there, because many people who are monitoring breaking news environments need some accounts to follow right out of the box. And you can use search terms within Twitter to search for accounts that may be talking about the breaking news that you're covering in the moment. But it's really helpful to expand, and the way that I think about advanced search is kind of like algebra, which is there's an order of operations. Essentially what we're doing with this search is we're saying combine any spelling of Kiev with any of the key terms that I might be interested in. Some key terms that we might keep adding here are shaheds, drones, any sort of synonyms that you think people would be using to post these tweets. And right away we get much more specific results I also always bring attention to the photo and video tab within Twitter itself, because we know that a lot of the false information spread, not just around the war, but globally, is visually manipulated information. Going one step further, oh, sorry, that's a little wonky. But going one step further, that very bottom set of key terms in the brackets, feel free to steal it. Every online researcher has their own version of this. This is mine. The reason why I use this is because if, for example, I'm looking for an eyewitness of a bombing or an explosion, I would like for these key terms to be included with the words I. And you can see right away that Alexandra has tweeted about hearing an explosion. That's somebody you might consider reaching out to as a reporter. We're also seeing some pro-Russian accounts right away spreading some misinformation about the attacks on Bucha. So we can immediately start building up accounts that might be interesting to us that are spreading false information. This also works. I'm sorry, this Z, it's really a crapshoot of whether it works or not. But this Z is actually like a symbol for Z, and this RU is actually an emoji for the Russian flag. So you can kind of see it here if you squint. You can search for emojis within Twitter Advanced Search, and this can be really, really helpful if you're looking for specific locales or looking at groups that use emojis to associate with one another. Another example of this is eco-fascists very frequently use the green pine emoji. That can be a really useful thing to search for. And I'm sorry, I know I'm talking really fast because I really want to leave some time for questions. But I also wanted to show that this can be a really powerful combination. For example, if I'm looking for pro-Russian accounts, so that's the ZZ or U, and I want to get accounts that are talking about Bakhmut, or Russians use the name Artyomovsk for Bakhmut. And I want to make sure that tweets include links to Telegram channels, because I know a lot of false information is spread on Telegram channels. So this is actually the URL for sharing a Telegram profile. And what you're getting with this search is, you can kind of see it highlighted in red boxes. Sorry if you have to squint again. But you can see various Telegram accounts that these disinformation actors are citing where the information is coming from. So that way you can start building up your monitoring not just on Twitter, but on Telegram as well, and understand how those two platforms are interacting with one another. If you want to see the big picture on Twitter, a lot of the tools are now gone because of the API restrictions. There's one tool that still works, which is the Invid vVerify plugin. It is absolutely fantastic. I'm showing only one function, but it's really a Swiss Army knife for anybody researching online manipulation. I cannot recommend this enough. This was developed by fact checkers, and it's free. The one thing I will say is, in order to use the tool that I'm showing you, you have to sign up for an advanced account, and you have to do it with your work email address, because they manually vet every single person who has access to this tool to avoid it falling into bad actors' hands. So make sure you do that. They have this amazing tool called the Twitter SNA analysis, social network analysis, that allows you to essentially input some key terms and some dates that you might be interested in order to see the big picture of what the conversation on Twitter was like around this event. I will say that there's a limitation to how many tweets it pulls in. So, don't enter the word Trump for the last 5 years and expect good results. Try to be targeted with your searches, but it does give you incredibly useful information. So in this case, I wanted to see who used the words Bucha and staged together in the week of Bucha's liberation. And what it does is it actually shows you when the use of these terms peaked on Twitter. You can mouse over and see all the accounts that were doing this tweeting. You can click on it and get a beautiful list of tweets that were posted that day. You can download a CSV of those tweets. It's incredible. If your heart skips a beat at the word CSV, then this is the tool for you. It also, I won't walk you through all the information it pulls in, just enough for you to know that it's useful. It shows you the most retweeted users, and this is actually a fact check, but this is not, which is fun. And it actually also shows you the most active users, which, as you can see, is an absolutely different set of people. And once you click on one of these usernames, for example, here's the list of tweets that you see posted that is downloadable. You can click through it. It's an incredible tool if you want to get a bird's eye view of the conversation happening around a particular event on Twitter. You can use Google Advanced Twitter Search, and I will not spend too much time on it, except to say that it's incredibly useful. It's really useful for searching government or corporate websites, for example, for reports. You can use the /search operator for that. I really love the file type search operator as well, where you can input PDF, CSV, XLX, or anything else like that. Just make sure that when you use any search operator with a colon, you don't put a space behind it because it won't work. You can also use it to search other social media networks. So you can use it to search for Facebook groups. If you've tried to search Facebook, you know that its search results within Facebook are pretty heavily moderated. Google's are not. I'll show you an example for a second. You can also use this to search for Telegram groups. So again, t.me is the short URL that's used to post to Telegram profiles. This last one is courtesy of Bellingcat. They essentially created a search operator that's a fast way to find Twitter lists. So if, for example, a breaking news situation is happening and you don't have a lot of people that you follow on Twitter, where it says list name, just input any key terms or locations or anything else that might be of interest to you, and you'll get results with a bunch of lists that you might be able to start following live in real time. So thanks, Bellingcat. I really love this method for finding local groups. I'm a big believer in monitoring hyper-local communities, so neighborhood chats, buy and sell groups, city chats. Those are usually the ground floor for disinformation. And unlike Facebook proper, Google will still show you groups that are disinformation focused. For example, after January 6th, while I was working at BuzzFeed, it took just this one search operator to show that Facebook did not take down all of the Stop the Steal groups that they promised. I got something like 17 pages of results just with this Google search, and so I was able to write a very quick turnaround accountability story just using this. I won't spend too much time on Telegram because I know we have 8 minutes left. It is becoming an increasingly important social media platform for journalists to learn. I see people taking photos. One of the great tools to spider out and follow new Telegram's channels is TGStat. I will warn you that it is a Russian company, so be careful with one, giving it your money because there's a paid version. I don't think you need it. But two, just make sure that you double check any information that you're using from there. As I said, you can also use Google for Telegram channel discovery. You can use Telegram itself, and really fun, not a very widely known method, but if you find local Facebook groups and you know that there are local Facebook groups for areas where Telegram is popular, you can search for this URL to find Telegram groups that are searched within Facebook so that you can see where people are being sent. So when I was doing a story on Mariupol, this is how I found a lot of the local groups of people who are still in Mariupol who are talking about the situation on the ground after the occupation of the city. We have an entire hour-long workshop on Telegram on mediamanipulation.org that you can watch, which is why I'm not spending too much time on it. But also, if you have any questions, I basically live on Telegram. So if you ever need any help with your Telegram research, just let me know and I would be happy to help. So instead of a summary, I will just once again give you the link to this presentation because I know we've given you a lot of information in a short amount of time. And we have about 6 minutes left for anybody who has questions about the wall of text we just threw at you. Whew, that was fast talking. We did great. Yeah. I think we have a question up here. Anybody got a microphone? Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Dean Miller, Lead Stories. I think we're the biggest group in this room. We had a fact check on the Bannon Chinese scientist piece up on September 17th, and one of the things we did at the time, I should say I did, so blame me. I created an account in the update site, the what do you call it, preprint site, to demonstrate to readers that it's bullshit, that anybody can do that. Is that, what do you think of the ethics of that?
I think, yeah. Oh yeah. Check. I think you're right that you have to show sometimes and not tell because people need to know this, and that you can upload any kind of post you want to a preprint website. Preprint sites are in service of academia so that we can get feedback and correct our errors. So sometimes you'll upload something to a preprint site when it's 80% done, which is similar to you as a journalist might give something to your editor when it's 80% baked, and you know you have a mistake here and there, but that's their job, is to help you out. But the reason why they've developed in the field is because it enriches and improves the quality of our research if we can get feedback before we go into publication. What's interesting is that the tactic of playing on people's uncertainty and scientific uncertainty and fears, and then trying to use this as a legitimization aspect, I think is really quite awful. And the fact that Zenodo was hesitant to protect the integrity of its own site was something that we felt we needed to address. And I think that there was great work done by WAPO about deepfakes early on, where they were showing essentially what was the original video and what was the, Oh, you do it.
I mean, WAPO's great, but BuzzFeed News is recently deceased. So I want to highlight our former good work, which is that in order to raise awareness for deepfakes, we created a deepfake of Obama swearing and talking about how deepfakes are a danger. So I think that there's definitely, room to be creative with how we cover a lot of this stuff.
But just as a quick follow-up, has the open science movement proven during COVID to be a bit of a failure because of this?
No, I think it was, a executed social engineering attack, and that it takes time for institutions to figure out, well, what are the policies we're going to have if we are going to come under attack. What's interesting about the open science movement, it is one of the biggest reasons why we have such wonderful medical research around genetics, because genetics as a field was built through data science, was built through, genetics as a field rises at the same time that the internet becomes instrumental in helping people share information. And so scientists across the world were able to share these large data sets with one another and improve the science over time and do these very large collaborations because the internet was available. Our institutions are under attack, right? Media is under attack. It's not just that, somebody somewhere is trying to leverage this to make profit. What we're witnessing is that politicians understand that the speed and the scale of information, when leveraged against people's uncertainty and mistrust is a way to move forward as a political operation. And I think the time is now coming for us to build tools that incorporate political accountability into our tech reporting. So we have to look at the ABCDs of platform manipulation: actors, behavior, content, and design. When is it that the design of Facebook or the design of Zenodo is aiding and abetting just by the simple fact that it exists and they're not creating guardrails? When are they aiding disinformers? And those are the things we have to call attention to. It wasn't that, Cambridge Analytica hacked Facebook. They just used it as designed. And so our tech accountability reporting has to look at these political actors or these financial grifters and schemers and get to the bottom of this. It's going to become exaggerated over time, though, I think, where less and less truthfulness is going to be circulated through social media. In a weird way, it's fortunate that Musk has taken over Twitter because it reveals that politics are happening on social media platforms. People might have seen Zuckerberg as a very benign actor, but when you look at people like Joel Kaplan and Sheryl Sandberg and people that function politically within Facebook, you realize, oh, you control the infrastructure, you control the culture. And so I think it's up to us to really show these design flaws and force accountability into the internet, not just for the major platforms, but also Telegram and other spaces. They're going to have to take responsibility for how their tools are being used. And I think that journalists, in conjunction with academics, are the only ones that are really set to take on this challenge, because our job is to tell the truth. We're not here to do PR, and we're also not here to represent political parties. And so anything that we can do to reveal those fissures and those manipulators, the better off we're all going to be together as we enter this very uncertain technological future where 2024 we got 70 elections, right? How are we going to cover them? Or we're going to cover the technology that spreads information, and then we're going to have to hold accountable both the designers and the manipulators. I think that's time. I'm getting off the soapbox. Let's party. Peace. Minimal. When I didn't see you and I was supposed to get started, I was like, oh no. But thank you. Yes.
Joan, thank you very much. My name is Ray. I'm a professor from Florida also.
Okay, I'm with me.
Cool.
Please, if it's possible, leave the room. We have to clean for the next